Here at Mark Rogers TV, we want to provide you with clear and honest and in-depth and insightful analysis. We want to provide the truth. We want to push past the perception and the national groupthink, and we want to get to the facts, and we want to display it in context as much as possible. And so we definitely invite your comments, your analysis, your take. I learned so much from you, and again, the comments that I get on these videos. So what we're doing right now is, now that the 2014 regular season and the bowls are complete, we want to break down the conferences. We did this last season. We're going to do it this season in a bit of a different fashion. We've come up with a system that we think is going to be fairly effective. No, it's not flawless. It's not perfect. It's not going to take into account the games played outside of the Power 5. So it's a self-contained measurement within the Power 5 structure. So what we're going to do is we're going to take all the results of the Power 5 conference games that are played cross-sectional. So the SEC versus the Big 10, the Big 12 versus the ACC, and so forth. Those Power 5 non-conference games. We're also going to take into account those games played by the major independents. How we're going to do that is, first of all, what's the record between, let's say, the SEC and the other Power 5? So that's our first point of analysis. The SEC this season went 11-11 against the other Power 5 conferences. But of course, we've got to put that into context. And I think our best example of that was the last regular season weekend, in which the ACC defeated the SEC in 4 consecutive games. Credit the ACC for winning the scheduled games on the field, but those games had to be put into context. Georgia Tech defeated Georgia. That was a comparable matchup. A 2 seed from the ACC defeated a 4 seed from the SEC. But the other matchups were not comparable seedings, so again, credit given to the winner, but the games and the matchups have to be placed into context. So that's what we're going to do here. We are comparing the Power 5. We're first going to look at the record of the Power 5 matchups. So the SEC played, for example, 22 out-of-conference games against the Power 5. Okay, what were the records of those teams? What was the winning percentage? Secondly, and most importantly, is the seeding. Let's talk about the seeding. So I seeded each and every Power 5 league. So, for example, in the Big 10, of course, Ohio State's the 1 seed. Who's the 2 seed? Is it Wisconsin, who won the West? Is it Michigan State, who had the best record and overall record? Okay, the way I seeded these leagues was I went with the conference record, because that's most important. Those are the games played within the conference, so that's a closed environment versus out-of-conference scheduling that can be all over the place. So I seeded these leagues based on, number 1, conference schedule and conference record, and then if there was a tie, I went with a head-to-head matchup. Baylor, TCU, I went with a head-to-head matchup. If those 2 teams did not play, then I went with the overall record. So I seeded all the conferences, the SEC, the ACC, and the Big 12, or the Big 10, 1 through 14, the Big 12, 1 through 10, and the Pac-12, 1 through 12. Then I went with a point system. Let me explain this. I hope it makes sense. So for every win for a particular league, so I listed out all the SEC wins against the Power 5 conferences, against the other 4 conferences. I gave 10 points to the SEC for every win. I gave a negative 10 for every loss. That was our starting point. But then I took seeding into account. Of course, a 10th place team in one league is supposed to lose to a 2nd place team in another league. So how should that be measured? Well, 10 points are given for a win, and then the seeding's taken into account. So, for example, Ohio State beat Alabama. They're both 1 seeds. Ohio State in the Big 10 is given 10 points. And then it stops right there, because they're 1 seeds. They're both 1-seeded teams. For example, though, Alabama beat West Virginia. The 1 seed out of the SEC defeated the 6 seed out of the Big 12. So 10 points given to the SEC to start, but then I took into account the seeding. It's a 5-seeded difference. 1st place versus 6th place. So 5 points come off of that total, so the SEC is given 5 points for that victory, Alabama over West Virginia. So if you play along, maybe the most extreme case in the nation, the much talked about Missouri loss to Indiana. How does that play out? Missouri, the 2 seed in the SEC. Yes, they are the 2 seed. If you look at the conference record, it's 7-1. Indiana's the 13 seed out of the Big Ten. Okay, so the Big Ten's given 10 points for winning the game. Plus, it's an 11 seed difference. So the Big Ten's given 21 points for that win. The SEC gets a negative 21 because they get minus 10 for the loss, plus the 11 seeds are taken off. So negative 21 for the SEC. So I've played with this. I've looked at it. I've done a lot of analysis and a lot of examples to make sure that this makes a whole lot of sense. Would love to hear what you have to say. Now we're going to knock out our videos 1 through 5 and measure these wins. Because if you just look at the win-loss total, it tells us one thing. Most of these conferences are right around 500 against each other. But look at the seedings. Take those into account. No, this is not a perfect system because it doesn't take into account the SEC's 2 wins against East Carolina or against Boise State or the Vandy loss against Temple. We're not taking non-Power 5 conference play into account here. This is a closed measurement within the Power 5. How did they measure up against each other? Would love to hear what you have to say. We're going to knock out these videos right here on Mark Rogers TV.